What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This is episode number 263. My name is Marshall. I am one of your Limited Resources. And of course, as you've grown accustomed, I have a very special guest host with me this week. I'll introduce him in just a moment. But before, let's talk about Card Kingdom for a minute. They are the sponsors of this podcast. They have been for a long time, and for good reason. They're one of the best stores you can visit if you need to buy Magic product. You can get sealed product. You can get singles. If you want to fill out that latest standard deck or maybe your commander deck, you can find that stuff there. If you want to get together and draft with your friends, you can buy some sealed product from Card Kingdom, get together, do a draft. And then the really cool part is that you can grab all the rares and the valuable cards that you happen to open, and you can actually sell them back to Card Kingdom. They'll give you plus 30% on everything that you sell to them, and then you can trade them in for more booster packs. It's sort of the circle of life, and I think that that's just one of the many great things about Card Kingdom. I certainly recommend checking them out at cardkingdom.com. All right, so that brings us to our guest host. This is actually somebody who I've wanted to have on the show for quite a while. We got a little push on Twitter finally, and I was like, okay, fine, let's get this thing set up. I have professional poker player and I think just as importantly, professional magician Eric Froehlich on the show. Eric, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you. We go in the same circles. I consider you a friend. I've talked to you at many tournament and stuff, but I'm really happy that we finally have been able to carve out a little bit of time to get you on the show.
Yeah, you're a busy man.
That I am. Finally being home is nice, and the fact that you were too helps out a lot because I know you travel quite a bit as well. So what I want to do here, Eric, is I want to start with the time-honored tradition of Limited Resources, a Crack-A-Pack. This is going to get us an idea of how you draft cons and kind of your approach to pack one, pick ones. This is from Ewan, and he is from. I met him at GP Ottawa. He gave me the pack to crack, so thank you for that, Ewan. So what are you hoping I open here, Eric?
Oh, boy. I'm going to go with Wingmate Rock.
The wingmatest of rocks. Seems reasonable. Let's see if we get there. So our first card is Mardu Horde Chief.
Mardu Horde Chief is a great card.
That's a good one, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think white is the best color in the set. I think that's pretty common opinion these days. Mm-hmm. And that card is just great. Like, very good aggressive shell. Of course, a 2/3 body in the Land of Morphs is fantastic. Creating a 1/1 token is always good, and the fact that it's a warrior even better. And so, yeah, it's just kind of a great card in the curve. Exactly what you want in your black-white warrior aggressive deck, and really just can be played in any white deck.
Yeah, I've always been impressed, too, by the 2/3 body. Like, even on those awkward times when you just have to cast it on its own, it just seems to pull its weight where you don't feel like, ugh, like I didn't get my value. It's kind of like, this is okay still, even though, of course, you'd rather have the warrior friend.
Yeah, you'd love to have the warrior friend, but it's one of those cards where you can have as many of them in your deck as you want, and if you don't have an earlier job, like you said, you just play the 2/3 body, and it can generally just attack freely, again, into the Land of Morphs, where you can just play the next one and kind of start chaining them together and creating an army that way.
Yeah, that's what I've seen for sure. Enoch Tracker is next, the 3/3 first strike morph.
Yeah, that guy's a filler card. A 29th, so to speak. Not really.
Yeah.
I'd like to have in my main deck. It's made it a few times. It's, it can fill out the curve when you need the morph. It's one of the weaker morphs, clearly. I mean, 3/3 body, not too impressive to unmorph, loses the fight against basically all the other morphs. Hard casting that guy is not a good spot to be in. So,
right, the 6-mana 3/3.
You're basically looking at a 2/2 vanilla for 3 with very marginal upside.
Right, and I think that, in many ways, Enoch Tracker is a victim of his environment, right? I mean, the fact is we just have so many really powerful morphs that you just kind of don't need to dip down this low. I think in a regular set, this is a type of card that might get a lot more play. I mean, I don't know about you, but I value morph, just the fact that you can play it at all as a morph, very highly. Like, I tend to plan my games in the mindset of, well, what if things don't go exactly how I planned them? And morphs really kind of bail you out on that.
I agree completely. Yeah, it's definitely one of those things where it kind of fills multiple spots in the curve, which is why things, that have monstrous or, other abilities we've seen in other sets are so much more valuable, because when you flood out, you can make more use out of the more expensive side of the card, the 3/3 first striker for 6, so to speak. And when you just need a 3-drop, it fills that role quite well. But yeah, the product of the environment, absolutely. It's still one of the weaker morphs that you can actually find. And because there's so many other better options, it's a card that's generally not going to make the main deck, but if it has to be played, it's not disastrous by any stretch.
Right. Speaking of disastrous, we've got a naturalize here. I actually haven't seen this resolved yet in the format.
No, me either. Never. I mean, there's so few powerful enchantments and artifacts. I mean, the artifact cycle, of course, is the banners, which, reasonable chance that you're going to see one in most packs that you open, but they are very weak and, generally not where you want to be. There are decks that can make use of them, but even the decks that want them, it's generally not a card that's very good in those decks anyway. So really weak cards, and there's just not a lot to see. You're looking at like the Warden, the 4/4 unmorph, which is not much better than the Anok tracker.
Right. Ghost Fireblade comes to mind, but
yeah, that's a good card, and can certainly lead to blowouts. And being able to kill Suspension Field is certainly a great thing, but you need to see several copies of these cards before you're willing to get around with a naturalize rotting in your hand. So
right,
not a card I've seen cast either.
This is one that I've seen. This next card's one I've seen cast a lot from Owen Turtenwald. Actually, it's Sidisi's pet. He seems to really like this card.
I don't know if he really likes this card or just happens to
he ends up being forced
pretty often. But I mean, the card has merit. It is very cheap to unmorph, which is nice, and can sometimes lead to some pretty favorable situations where they try to remove it, or they try to get through it on some of these attacks where they're trying to press an advantage with their 3/3s, and you only have a couple mana behind, and you're able to get a reasonable tempo swing that way. It's also one of the better morphs to be able to put counters on with something like Dragon Scale Boon, just because a 3/6 lifelinker is going to be pretty tough to race or to fight through, and all those things are certainly advantageous. But yeah, it's still definitely on the weaker end of the morphs. It's just not super powerful.
Yeah, unless you're Owen Turtenwald, don't mess with this thing. I actually saw him at the GP, and he played it in both his sealed and his first draft deck. And I was like, what is wrong with you? Why do you keep playing this card? I think he just kind of found himself in a spot where he needed an extra playable, but it was fun.
Again, it's right where you talked earlier. It's a curve filler. I mean, sometimes you just need that 3-drop, and you can do a lot worse than that guy.
Yeah. And speaking of a lot worse than that guy, no, this card's actually better. Glacial Stalker.
Ooh, Glacial Stalker. Yeah,
I'm a big fan of this card.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything that you can basically attack freely once you have 5 mana. The tempo swings where, there's nothing in the format that can really block it, that less than mana, that it's not just going to, eat and crunch through and keep coming back for more. And, 6 mana or whatever for a 4/5 creature, the base stats are not terrible. It can still pack a punch. It's one of those things where 4 damage is a large percentage of 20 total life. It adds up quick. And so, yeah, that guy's powerful.
Yeah, this is one of those cards, too, that I always feel like slips under the radar a little bit. Mm-hmm. I was looking at this card, and I was actually writing for the column for Limited Information, and I was thinking about it in terms of comparing it to Snowhorn Rider, right? And Snowhorn Rider, is clearly a better card, right? You're getting a 5/5 trample instead of a 4/5 without trample. So there's some bonuses there. But the more I thought about it, like, they're a lot closer than they actually seem, given the fact that one of them is just blue, and you can play it in your Jeskai deck or whatever, versus the other one that requires you to have these 3 colors of mana, and therefore puts you in a lot more constrictive type scenario. Glacial Stalker, I actually feel like it's slightly underrated. I just, like, every time I play it, I'm like, this is just pulling its weight every time. But I also see them go quite late, and I don't think people really consider them, something that they need to prioritize, which I suppose I don't either. But I don't know. I just feel like this guy's like a little underappreciated.
Yeah, I'm with you completely. It is a card that's going to go a little bit later. It's actually probably going to go around a similar spot in the draft as something like Snowhorn Rider, because exactly the restrictions. The 3 colors are quite a bit tougher to unmorph than the 1, but I mean, +1 power and trample is a huge bonus. So
yeah.
You're looking at basically things that cost the exact same amount of mana. It's just the colors. And, that's the tricky part of a draft format like Cons, where do you take the 1 color card or do you take the more powerful 3 color card? And once you're already firmly in those 3 colors and you have, fixing, well, where you want to be. The Snowhorn Rider's
right.
Better. But, Glacial Stalker pulls its weight in a lot of different decks.
What do you think about Aerostorm? That's our next card.
I love Aerostorm. I think Aerostorm is one of the most powerful commons in the set. But we keep, pulling from the previous card. the mana restrictions of playing double red is huge in
Yeah.
a particular set. Red is not a particularly strong color. There's a lot of good removal spells, but Lava Axe your guy or your face is fantastic. Like, just that, if you're just like, this is a 5-mana sorcery, 5 colorless that, you know, does what Aerostorm does, well, this is the best common in the set.
Right.
At double red, well, now it becomes a lot harder to cast, and you really need to be having at least 7 red sources in your deck. You really want closer to 8, which is a lot to ask for a lot of decks. It's not easy. There aren't really a lot of good, you know, 2-color base red decks. You know, assuming like a Mardu deck or something like that, it's rarely going to be, you know, red, white, splash, black. That's kind of the less common route. And the same thing with Jeskai. It's rarely like red, white, splash, blue. Sometimes it's blue, red, splash, white. You kind of need a lot of red sources to make this card strong, but it is incredibly strong.
Yeah, it's funny. I think that, like, one way to put a punctuation mark on Aerostorm is, like, how often are you playing a game of cons and it all comes down to, well, what if he has Aerostorm? Right? I mean, I know, like, being in the booth, it's like you just have to play around this card so often. You know, in the mid to late stages of the game, if your opponent got off to like a decent start with their aggressive deck, and now they're just kind of attacking with a bunch of things, and you're just like, I could take this and you know, go to 4, go to 5 and be fine. But it's like, oh, what about Aerostorm? Like, I just lose to Aerostorm. I find that, you know, that line of thinking where you're kind of eliminating cards and saying, can I take this? Can I survive? Always seems to go to Aerostorm, and you always have to decide, well, you know, do I want to put myself in a spot where I'm dead to that card?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. And newer players, I think, are very commonly going to just play the card Lava Axe. And Aerostorm's just never dead. I mean, it kills so many creatures in this format that, you know, even when you can't go to the face, like, it still allows you to press your advantage. It is a solid removal spell. You know, if you look at a card like Throttle, which costs 5 and, you know, basically deals with 4 toughness creatures, that's more or less what Aerostorm is as well. But, you know, it has the ability to go to the face and sometimes get that 5th extra damage too. So
Yeah.
a lot of power in one card.
I am a big fan of it. This next one, I will admit that I've played more times than I ever thought I would when I did the set review. It's Kintree Warden.
Oh, wow, yeah. I played that card quite a bit early on in testing for the Pro Tour, you know, during the drafts with Channel Fireball. I think I was overvaluing having the curve fillers, and, you know, where we talked about how great Morph is, and, you know, having all those options and all the things it does for you in the late game. I was overvaluing something like Kintree Warden, where in the late game, oftentimes it's still like kind of mediocre. Being able to, you can't like force it through something. It's not a Glacial Stalker, a Snowhorn Rider, or Woolly Loxodon, where, you know, it's packing that punch later on, where, you know, you can still attack freely with it, but you're just investing a bunch of mana to save your 1/1 Regenerator, which is not fantastic. And so it's been kind of a while since I've got that guy in my deck. It's pretty underwhelming. It's a reasonable sideboard card against cards like Woolly Loxodon. Of course, if they start showing you a bunch of cards like Snowhorn Rider, it starts to look a little silly. So it's a card that, you know, you try to avoid, but in that same, you know, my 6th, 7th, 8th 3-drop, if I need another morph, it certainly can get thrown in there.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a crappy card in general. The times when I've actually found it good are 2. One of them, what you said. If I see like 2 Woolly Loxodons flipped up, I'm a lot more, and my deck is defensive, I'm a lot more likely to try to bring this guy in. And the other time is with Secret Plans, right? Like,
Sure.
That has become a deck that I actually respect. I like playing it. I have a lot of fun with it, but I also just thought, yeah, this is just very powerful if it comes together correctly. And the one thing that does seem to fuel, you know, the Secret Plans deck is having these morphs that are cheap to flip up. And, you know, I learned a lot actually from Kintree Warden and from Monastery Flock in that way, because I wasn't playing when morphs were out last time. And so this is my first experience outside of like Cube playing with a set that had a lot of morphs in it. Because Cube, you know, there's a few select powerful morphs, but you kind of figure out what those are quickly, and it can only be one of a few things. But in a set like this, it can be a much wider range of cards. And, you know, I think it took cards like this one and like Monastery Flock to kind of show me, you know, paying attention to that morph cost is huge. Like, most of the cards in this set revolve around 5, right? You get to 5 mana, you flip the thing over, and it becomes some big scary monster. But there's select ones that are a lot worse when they're flipped up. You know, we talked about Sidisi's Pet earlier. I mentioned Monastery Flock. This Kintree Warden falls into the camp too, that if you can leverage the fact that you can flip it up for so cheap, then all of a sudden the card becomes powerful. Now, on their own, not so much, right? I mean, a Monastery Flock's okay. Kintree Warden, I would prefer just not to have in my deck generally, and NCDC's Pet, the same thing. I just don't really want to play it, right? But now if all of a sudden you're flipping them up and drawing a card, or, you're kind of getting some leverage off of it, it just made me look at morphs under a slightly different light. Even though generally speaking, like I would rather just not play these. I'd rather have an air quotes, a real morph, like something that I can flip up into an Obzon Guide or a Abomination of Gadul or whatever.
Right, the cheap morph interactions with some of the powerful enchantments are certainly there, but the Kintree Warden is still so much weaker than a card that you've kind of already put not the greatest light in Monastery Flock. Monastery Flock is still far more powerful.
It's way better. Yeah.
And then you have cards like Temur Charger and Dragon Eye Savants that are just so much better and cheaper than Kintree Warden. So, it's kind of okay if I need to play the Kintree Warden to make my more powerful cards even more powerful, then of course you're going to play it. But there are still so many more cards that feel better that you would prefer. So you don't want to be there, but you certainly can be there in a pinch.
Yeah, I mean, when I first read it, I have to admit, I pretty much just dismissed it. I was just like, no, I'm not playing that. And then I thought, okay, well, Secret Plans makes me occasionally. Next, we've got a land. It's Swiftwater Cliffs, so the blue-red dual land.
Yeah, the lands are good. I mean, I think that some people overvalue them a little bit. The difference in your mana base from having, one extra dual land is not huge. You're getting one extra source. Coming into play tapped is a very real cost. There is a limit to the number of lands you want to play depending on your mana curve and when you need to get things out. And I think that sometimes people jam all of their come into play tap lands into decks where they really can't afford to do that. So there are some things you need to keep in mind, but yeah, you're gaining a life and you're fixing your mana a little bit, so it's definitely a good card.
Yeah, it seems fine. Jeskai Wind Scout is next. Where are you at on this one?
It's funny. I was going to say that it is both overvalued, but then it's also undervalued. It feels like the realm that people have this card rated in it is so wide still.
Isn't that funny? I feel the same way. Some people tell me that this is just the common that they want, and they want as many of these as they can get, and I'm like, I can see that, but also I've seen decks kind of built around these, and then somebody's like, debilitating injury that, and then they look at their hand and it's all like crippling chills and force aways, and they're like, oh, okay, I guess this is like incredibly fragile after all.
I was thinking of like two different camps as soon as you mentioned the card, where some people just obviously the card's playable. It's a 2/1 flyer for 3 mana. Even with no prowess, that's not a terrible cost, but it doesn't do very well defensively, and it doesn't get through very many flyers. It's hard to pump its toughest big enough to get through pretty much anything. Like, you're talking about 1 toughness and you really need to get to 3, so you're casting multiple spells. If these are sorceries, not instants, they're able to play around it very easily, because playing a couple spells before combat attacking for 4 just is not that exciting. So it's better in more dedicated Jeskai decks, which are going to be, again, flooded out with more spells that are not creatures. And, you run into a lot of risks where people just have removal and can take care of your Wind Scouts. And exactly as you stated, if your hand is a bunch of Forceaways and Crippling Chills, you're trying to just buy time while their morphs and 2-drops aren't killing you. It's a tough spot to be in, and why that deck is not one of the most popular decks in the format, I guess. So, in a lot of ways, it's far more powerful than like a Glacial Stalker. In a lot of ways, it's just not. Like, Glacial Stalker is just a consistent 4/5 once you flip it up, and I think it's pretty far behind. I'm going to butcher the name. The Master of the Hidden Way, is that?
No, that's it.
Okay,
Mystic of the Hidden Way.
Mystic of the Hidden Way, sure. The 3/2 unblockable morph is just, I think, a much better card and serves the function in those type of decks a lot better than Jeskai Wind Scout often does, and I think that not a lot of people necessarily agree with that. I think it kind of goes 50-50-ish.
Yeah, I definitely fall on the I'm down on this card. Like, I almost never end up with these in my deck because I think other people just value them higher than I do. But this kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier, Eric, about like we talk about on the podcast, we talk about BCSM. We call it it's best case scenario mentality, right? Where somebody looks at a card and they say, well, what can this card do for me? and then they evaluate the card based on that. So they say, oh, it's a Jeskai Wind Scout. A lot of times it's going to be a 3/2 flyer for 3. It's going to beat down in the air even when it's not. This card's good, right? And my mentality I shift away from that, and I try to look at it we call it the quadrant theory here on the show, which is we try to look at cards under 4 different lenses when we're evaluating them, and those are the developing stages of the game, when the game's at parity, when you're behind, and when you're ahead. And I try to put the card into each of those boxes and see how it performs, right? And I can see that Wind Scout, when you're developing, is very good. I mean, there's not a lot of better things to do on turn 3 than play an evasive threat that can get bigger. That's really good. And then when you're winning, it's quite good too. Though I will caveat that winning is the least important of the quadrants, because basically any spell is good when you're winning is kind of how we think about it. So whatever on that.
That's the advantage.
Yeah, it's just you just get to keep, moving forward. And some are better than others, but it's whatever. As long as it's not, just blank or a land. And this one certainly category is something that, helps press your advantage. But then, I look at parity, and I could see this card being decent. I'd give it sort of a middle grade on there. Sometimes you can peck away in the air with it, which is really good. I mean, you're helping to break parity, and sometimes it's just going to stare at whatever blocker they have. Like you said, it's not attacking through anything, right? Not even another Jeskai Wind Scout very often, let alone a High Spire Mantis or a Monastery Flock. So I kind of give it a break even on that. And when you're behind, the card's terrible. It's really bad. It blocks awful. It doesn't even block a token sometimes, right? And other times it'll trade for a morph, and you're pretty happy about it. And, for me, that doesn't add up to a great card. It adds up to a playable card and a decent card, but not one that I want to prioritize over, what you said, Mystic of the Hidden Way, or even a Glacial Stalker, which is just, to me, it's just more versatile. You put Glacial Stalker on that same spectrum, and it's it scores significantly better in some of those boxes than Wind Scout does. So
yeah, I mean, it depends on a lot of the board states. The fact that you can attack into something like a High Spire Mantis is, a pretty good trait, and that's going to be true of basically any evasion creature in that history when you're talking about, board stalls, early stages, and when you're ahead. Of course, like you said, pretty much anything is good when you're ahead because you're just looking to, push on the gas pedal. But the way that the format kind of breaks down when you're looking at, the various blue decks, you're looking at Teamer, where, an ability like Ferocious is very important, and it's very hard to trigger that off something like a Wind Scout. You'd rather your 3-drop be something that you can unmorph into something huge, a Snowhorn Rider, a Glacial Stalker, a Pine Walker, a Woolly Loxodon, these giant creatures that, when you're casting your Crippling Chills and Force Aways, which are good with the Wind Scout, they're better when you're attacking for a lot more.
Yeah, exactly.
If you look at a Sultai deck, it's the same thing, only probably even more dramatic, where, you're generally playing a more defensive game. You're looking for, cards to delve, and the 2/1 flyer that's just going to trade off with a morph is no better than any other morph, and it doesn't have the upside of, unmorphing. So there's a lot of negatives there, and in a blue-red evasion deck, a blue-white evasion deck, or a combination, some kind of Jeskai deck that is aggressive, a tempo-oriented deck, that's where it's at its best, and I still think it's weaker than a card like Mystic. So, yeah, it's just one of those cards that's good, not great.
All right, and our next card is Disowned Ancestor, which is...
another great example of good, not great.
Yeah, it fits the same description. It's a card that I've always found kind of fascinating because I don't put my expectations on a 1-drop aren't very high, right? I generally don't play them, but lately they've been, I don't know. It feels like R&D maybe it's been pushing it a little bit or something and saying kind of pushing those boundaries. And the main way that I've found that they can make a 1-drop appealing to me is if they make it fine on turn 1, which you would expect, but then if they can also make it relevant in the later game, maybe not hugely impactful, but just give me something. And I'm way more likely to play a 1-drop. And I think Disowned Ancestor kind of fits that description.
Yeah, it's perfect for the early game because it's going to, play the defensive role. It blocks almost every creature that can really be played in the first 4 turns or more of the game. And it's a mana sink later on. It becomes a threat. If you draw it on turn 6, yeah, it's not great. But it can become great. Like, it can actually just become this giant creature. You have a few extra turns, you're sitting at board parity where you don't need the 0-4 blocker, and it just becomes a 4-8, and that's real. Like, it takes some time, it takes some investment, but you're investing 1 mana into this card, which is completely reasonable. And so it kind of fits the bill of just a common limited theme where people like to jam 1-drops into their deck. They think that they're filling out the curve. Well, you can't do that because there are turns past turn 1 where you can draw these 1-drops. And even when it has evasion, even we're talking about 1/1 flyers for 1, like, that just is not an impactful card on, well, not very impactful on turn 1, but certainly not on like turn 5 or 6. It's just can't get through any other flyer in the game and can't block anything effectively. And really, it doesn't deal a lot of damage. So we're looking for abilities that, you can sink mana into, like the best of all time being a card like Figure of Destiny, which is of course completely busted, but you know what I'm saying? Like these creatures that become bigger where you can play it on turn 1, but on turn 5 it's still insane. Like, those are the best cards you can have.
Yeah, and I really like what you said, because I think you hit on a thing that we talked about earlier, which I was talking about quadrant theory, and you said when you draw this and you're at parity, then all of a sudden, like, now you've got something to work with. Sure, it isn't like the thing that just breaks the game open for you, but dang it, normally the 1-drop that you draw doesn't do anything. Like, it's just, you look at it, you're like, oh, God, I drew, like, of the non-land cards in my deck, this is probably the worst, right? And now you look at Disown Ancestor, and like you said, it's not a game breaker. It's not one that's just like, we got there, boys, Disown Ancestor. But at the same time, you've got a plan now. You've got a card that affects the board and that can actually take you into the future of the game and actually give you a way to win or get slightly ahead or whatever. And I value that a lot. Now, the weird part, though, is it's still, and maybe it's just because Cons is quite powerful, I've just found that Disown Ancestor is still kind of just mediocre to me, right? Like, it still doesn't push it up into this, like, gotta have it category.
No, certainly not. And it's a card that you can often table, but it's kind of like a lot of the Outlast cards. I think the Outlast mechanic is one of the most overrated we've seen because they are not chronomatons. Like, you have to tap them at sorcery speed, which is very yeah, that card is fantastic, and the tempo advantage it gives, and that it just sits there waiting to block. Okay, I can't attack because you have this giant creature. You're like, okay, now it's even bigger. That's insane. That's great. Yeah. Like, that's not what Outlast is. Like, when you put Outlast on a card like Falconer, where you have essentially a 3/4 flyer for like 3 mana plus a 1 mana investment that gives all your other creatures an evasion. Okay, that's insane. We all know that. But the base stats of just being a 2/3 for 3 / 3/4 flyer for 4 are insane. Like, of course that card is great. Right. We're going to respect that card every time. Well, there's some rares will take over it, but that card's great. You're never unhappy to first pick that card. Mm-hmm. And it's hard with a lot of the outlasting. The base stats have to be somewhat reasonable. If you have a 2/1 for 2, okay, now we have a card. Like, it's not unplayable. That an 0/4 for 1, not unplayable. That, and when you have these board parodies where you don't need the blocker and you can turn it into a very real threat, okay, well that fits into all the quadrants you're talking about. Like, when you're ahead, it's not the best thing you can draw, but it's still a spell and it will become a threat. When you're behind, it can be a great blocker. When you're at parity, it can become a huge threat. So, it really fills a lot of different functions that none of which is it fantastic at, but it's reasonable enough at all of them that you have, a solid playable, a good, not great, as we said.
Yeah. I like what you said about the parity thing that we talked about a little bit before. And then I want to hit on also what you mentioned at the beginning. You said you felt like it was a little bit overrated, and I agree with you. And I think part of the reason why you actually just hit on for a second, and we're talking about Outlast here, of course, is that you said, well, when you don't need this blocker, then you can start leveling them up. But the problem is that in order to be at parity, you need blockers. So it's a little trickier to find that spot where you've got enough blockers that you can finally start leveling up this one Disown Ancestor that's going to take 3 or 4, or maybe even 5 turns, before it actually gets to there. So it's a tricky mechanic, but I agree. I think it's slightly overrated, but it does have a spot. And for 1 mana, Disown Ancestor definitely pulls his weight, though not a high pick, right? I'm not looking to pick it here. Like you said, I can table the thing if I want it.
Yeah, it is a card that I would expect to table more often than not, but it's not terrible. There are decks where it's going to be better in. Of course, it is a warrior, which is a thing, and it does turn on your skull hunters and your horde chiefs, and
Right.
create raid. That nice 0-4 body that can attack freely into dealing no damage but trigger your raid. Like that's a thing. So it's one of these cards that doesn't do anything fantastic, but does so many things decently that it's just kind of a solid card. It's not needed in every deck. If you don't get it, it's rare that you're going to be, oh man, I really needed that disowned ancestor. And you're like, no, that's not going to happen very often. But it's not as powerful as some of the other one drops. Like this set has, of course, like cards like Mardu Hateblade and Ruthless Ripper that are going to be great defensively at any point in the game where they can't get outshine. Where you draw a Disowned Ancestor, they have Woolly Locks on. You're like, all right, well, this guy's kind of just embarrassing. It's just like any other creature that's just going to chump block. It's not quite as much utility as some of the other more powerful one drops later in the game, but it's something.
Yeah, totally. And by the way, speaking of the other one drops that do that, Ruthless Ripper is our first uncommon.
Well, that card is one of my favorite.
I'm a big fan of Ruthless Ripper. Ruth, she does work.
Yeah, that card is just so powerful. I mean, it's a morph that creates a huge tempo swing. I mean, we've talked about Glacial Stalker. You unmorph that thing after they block with their morph. You have your 5 mana up. They've got their 2 morphs and 3 lands tapped with 4 mana total, and you can just attack with impunity. I've got a 4/5. They block. I flip it up. And Ruthless Ripper just gets flipped up. No man.
Oh god, it's so nasty.
2 damage, which people I think underestimate something like 2 damage. Like it sounds like, oh, I missed a point here, I missed 2 points there. Like that's no big deal. What's 1 or 2 damage? You're like, well, that's 10% of your life total. Like that's a number. Like Ruthless Ripper, it does some damage, and that tempo swing where you block their Glacial Stalker, they take 2, they invest their entire turn, and now you get to have 5 mana up and they're tapped out and their creature's dead, where you're just flipping your Abzan guy, and the tempo swing is just so dramatic. Like you just don't lose those games very often, and Ruthless Ripper is one of the things that just turns that on.
Yeah, I've seen it occupy this kind of unique space too in the format where people, you're playing your Sultai deck or whatever, and you can just sort of set up the scenario where you can kind of race because you've got this extra 2 points of reach that they might not know is coming, and they try to play around stuff, but if you don't have red, they're not putting you on some spell that's going to zap them down from 2 to 0, but you just attack with everything. And I can't tell you, I mean, it's happened multiple times for me that I've played a Ruthless Ripper post combat and just revealed when they're at 2, and it's just, I get the kind of the Bueller slump out of them where it's just like, ugh, like,
yeah,
I
exactly.
didn't think that was coming. Like I thought I was getting a draw step. I thought I was safe because you're in these colors that just don't have spells like that. And it's like, I'd like you to meet my friend Ruth. Here she is.
Yeah, it's definitely, the added reach is just a very real thing. You're right.
Yeah. Next, Nomad Outpost.
Yeah, Nomad Outpost is a great card.
Yeah. So you mentioned earlier, you thought people slightly overrated the duels and, citing the fact that it adds 1 extra color, to your suite of colors, and that the very real cost of it entering the battlefield tapped. Now, how does that translate to tri-lands for you?
Fairly dramatically different. The issue with the dual lands is that they produce only 2 colors. Like once you're in 3 colors and you know which dual lands you need, okay, there's a higher priority. You can't take them early. Like you can't just first pack a Blossoming Sands and be like, all right, I'm gonna go Abzan. Let's see how this works out. Like, no, that doesn't work. But you can take early picks on these tri-lands because the odds are they're gonna make your deck. I mean, they are already dual lands that fit a lot of different, decks that you can have, and when they happen to be all 3 of your colors, it's just fantastic. Like adding 2 sources, needing being able to play that extra plains or extra mountain or extra swamp because you have so many additional sources because this land does so much for you, it is a very real benefit. It makes your mana that much smoother, and 3 is dramatically more than 2 in that regard.
For sure. Yeah. Plus, you kind of open up the floodgates, too, of going many different directions with them. I like that freedom. Next card. Ooh, this goes well with the Nomad Outpost and the Ruthless Ripper. It's Chief of the Edge.
Yeah, the Chiefs are pretty dang good.
Yeah, Chief of the Edge. Cornerstone, maybe that's a little strong, but, one of the key cards in what's considered Well, it's got to be considered the best 2-color combo in the format, right? The black-white Warriors deck.
I think Cornerstone's completely fair. I mean,
Okay.
a Chief of the Edge, you're talking about a strategy that often involves things like tokens, cards like Mardu Horde Chief, Take Up Arms, Mardu Charm,
Right.
all creating warrior tokens. And now that all these tokens are going to trade with morphs, which are, of course, the pillar of the format, it's just huge. And creating this army of 1/1s is good. Creating this army of 2/1s is insane.
Right. It's a breaker. Yeah. How high on your list do you have, in general, of the archetypes that you see sort of draft in and draft out? Do you have the black-white Warriors deck? Is it near the top? Is it the top? Is it in the middle? Where does it rate for you?
I think the black-white warrior archetype, when you get it, is the most powerful thing you can do in cons.
Okay. Yeah. It hits that power and consistency cross section for you in the highest mark.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, at GP Nashville, and the team sealed on day 2, my team with Louis Scott Vargas and Paul Cheon gave me essentially the nut black-white warrior draft deck that you would want to have with, it had 2 chiefs in it, 3 horde chiefs, a rush of arms, a couple skull hunters, basically, the dream draft deck. And round after round, I would stall on 2 lands, 3 lands. I'd mulligan to 5 consistently, and I never came close to losing a game. Not even close.
That's insane.
There was only 2 games on the entire day, 5 rounds, where I finished below 20 life. I mean, the deck is just ridiculous. And I knew the deck was strong. It's hard to put together often in draft, a deck of that power level. Of course, everyone else has, team sealeds too. They're all playing powerful decks, but I don't think I realized just how strong these synergies and how powerful these cards actually are until playing that day where, again, round after round, I felt like I was drawing very poorly for what my deck was capable of, and I couldn't fathom at any point losing a game. Like it was
crazy.
It felt like God mode.
Right.
It was just ridiculous.
Now, so where does Chief of the Edge? Because I just got a glimpse of our rare. And I'm gonna spoil you. I think it might change how we evaluate this pack, but I do want to take a quick look back at what we've got here and kind of get your take on what you would take if let's say our rare was a junker. So just a quick review. We've got Chief of the Edge, Arrow Storm, Mardu Horde Chief. There's a Wind Scout, a Ruthless Ripper, and a Nomad Outpost. Those are the cards that I've kind of pulled aside as the real notables. The rest are kind of, there's a Glacial Stalker or whatever, but, nothing that you'd really consider first picking, I don't think.
Right. The Chief is where I'm at right now. I think it's just the most powerful card. I don't subscribe as heavily as a lot of other people on trying to stay, 1 color or 2 colors. Obviously, this being a 2-color card still makes it harder to pick both your colors that early on in the pack. But this Chief is so powerful. Like, the next best cards are, of course, a mono black card, a mono white card, and a black white, also including red dual land, which I'm just not going to take any of those cards over the more powerful black white one. Like if I'm going to take a Horde Chief, which is of course a very strong card, or a Ruthless Ripper, I'm probably going to hope to go black white, and I'm going to hope to get more powerful cards like the Chief anyway. So I'm just going to take the Chief.
Yeah, I like the Chief there too. Now, right as you say that, Efro,
yeah,
I'm going to throw a bit of a monkey wrench into the works here.
I'm always happy taking a card more powerful than Chief.
It is much more powerful in my opinion. Yes. And in fact, it also kills the Chief in the arena. It is Crater's Claws.
Yeah. So fireballs. Do we need to explain why fireballs are good?
Probably not. I mean, I think our listeners have a good feel for it. The way that I like to think about cards like Crater's Claws, and I think that it really sort of brings them into focus on how powerful they really are, is that you'll be playing a game of Magic where, you'll have a bunch of spells in your deck, a few spells in your hand, something on the board, and you're kind of crafting your game plan, right? And you're thinking, well, right now, this is probably my most powerful card, and I'm going to try to kind of leverage that to get ahead and stay ahead in this game, and I'm going to back it up with this. And, you're kind of putting these puzzle pieces together. And when I have Crater's Claws in my hand, that becomes my game plan. It's just, I end up being like, well, can I make this game stall out so that I'll draw enough lands to be able to finish off my opponent by just Crater's Claws to their head, plus maybe the Ferocious bonus? Or if we're racing, right? Like, can I just punch through enough damage so that it's like I have this trump card where I get to just hit you for 6 or 5 or whatever, and they're just like, oh, well, I guess I just lose. Or I get to clear out their key blocker at a key time where there's not that many removal spells that would do that at that stage, right? And when I think about a card that has that much influence on how I attempt to win a game of Magic, that draws my attention. Like, that says this is one of the best cards in the format.
Yeah, there's no bad function, as you mentioned. I mean, being able to kill almost any creature. I mean, it's very hard to get, a creature that you really want to kill on the other side of the battlefield where the toughness is going to be dramatically more than the mana cost. Right. And so Crater's Claw is generally going to be able to trade with anything at parity there. It's going to deal tons of damage to your opponent's face. And just the entire way that your game plan changes from, generally a game plan in a game of Limited is going to be, how do I reduce my opponent from 20 to 0? That's a lot of damage. But how do I reduce my opponent from 20 to 9? Well, that's a completely different game.
Yeah, that's a lot easier.
That's just a whole nother axis of what you're trying to do and the way that you can control your resources. And, you're still going to be trying to press your advantage here and there, trying to find good attacks, good blocks. But you can sacrifice so much position and so much card economy and do so many things that are quote unquote wrong in a game of Magic because I've got Crater's Claw and this just changed the entire way the game is played. It's just, okay, I win. Like, I just have to get you down to this reasonable life total and you're just dead.
Yeah. And the fact that it's single color as well means that, it's not like you're diving off the deep end and just going, well, I hope the rest of the Sultai cards come around because then I can actually play my It's just like, no, you probably could just splash this in the worst case scenario,
Yeah. I mean, it's not even a card that you want to play in the first couple turns. You pick up a little bit of mana fixing here or there and it just goes in any deck. It's just single red, so powerful. I mean, and even from like far behind, you're looking at some of the worst positions you can have, like an empty board on turn 5 where your opponent, played turn 3 morph, turn 4 morph, turn 5 flipped up Abzan Guide, and now you can just play like an Alpine Grizzly, Crater's Claw for 1 mana to kill the morph, and these things are just ridiculous tempo advantages where that's not even like a great scenario for Crater's Claws. Like generally you want to pull something huge or kill your opponent, and it just does so much.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, we had a really sweet pack there. There was a lot of great options, but yeah, I think you and I are both firmly in the Crater's Claws camp. And so I want to move us over to a little bit more of our general topic. But the way I want to do this, Eric, is kind of a hybrid approach, because when I have guests on the show, I like to talk to them about Limited, about Magic, how they approach it, what their mentality is, maybe some sticking points they have about improving and that kind of thing. And I definitely want to talk to you about that. But you've also got sort of a different thing going on because you're very well known. And I think that, when you're well known and you're a personality that's kind of out there, people also just want to ask you questions and they want to get to know you. And so, that would lend to more of an interview style piece. But I want to do kind of both. I want to ask you questions that I've got from our listeners and from me. I got them from our LRcast subreddit, and I got them from Twitter, and I also asked in the Patreon feed that's only for patrons. I also asked there for their questions. And so I've kind of culled together a bunch of the ones that I found interesting and a few of my own. And then I want to use those kind of as a platform to discuss, the way that you approach Magic and such. And the one thing that I also want to say, and this is a little more to the listeners than to you, Eric, directly, but is that, yes, Eric's a professional poker player. He's very well known for that. And there will be some relates along those things. But I think that, like, the thing that maybe people, like, the way I view you, Eric, is maybe a little different than I think your average fan, of you does, which is, I think they view you as a professional poker player that likes to play Magic. And while that might be true, when I think of you, I think of a Magic player. Like, I think that, like, I haven't really met anybody that shares the same level of passion and commitment and love of Magic as you. And I've heard you talk about poker, and I know that you appreciate it as a game and that you love it, and there's a lot of, great things about it. But when I hear you talk about Magic, it's different. It has this different vibe to me where it just seems to be more fulfilling, or, it just seems to kind of hit you at a different angle. And you are legitimately one of the best Magic players on the planet and have been for quite some time now. And I think that the fact that you happen to be very, very good at another game maybe allows for people to diminish that a little bit and say, yeah, but he's still a poker player that's playing Magic. And for the purposes of this show and the way I view you, I just wanted to kind of put out there that I don't actually view it that way. Like, I think that your Magic accomplishments stand on their own, and they don't, like, your poker stuff kind of doesn't factor in for me in that way. I just view them as sort of two different things. And maybe that's because, I also play poker and Magic, and I separate them out in a lot of ways. And so maybe I'm used to that, but I did just kind of want to set that on the table here for the listeners and for you, that, like, you're a Magic player. You're not just like a poker player that sometimes plays Magic.
Yeah, I guess it's a little weird just because poker is a little bit more public. There's coverage on television and on the internet and stuff where, the other side of your life is a little bit more out there, where, a lot of other players who are, in the same walk as I am, Channel Fireball pros who play Magic as more or less their profession and have other jobs as well. Well, those jobs aren't really talked about very often or well publicized, or your desk job, or, these aren't things that get talked about nearly as much as something like poker, I guess, is. So kind of makes sense where people are going to draw that conclusion. Also, my Twitter handle just being eFroPoker and things like that are probably not helping that cause, but yeah.
No, and I think it's fine. I think it makes sense for what you do, but I just want to, like, I have a unique position, right? Because being on coverage, I get to go out to all these tournaments. I get to be around you guys. I get to talk to you. I consider many of you, including you, friends, and people that I could ask for advice or talk to, and when you do that, you get a different perspective on people that isn't just their public persona, but it's actually like, well, what's actually making this person tick? And, like I said before, when discussions I've had with you and in times when I've watched you, on people's streams or talking on shows or whatever, it's become very clear to me, where you stand with Magic. And that isn't that it's like a secondary fun hobby for you while your real job is something else. Like, you take it every bit as seriously as many Magic pros that are only doing Magic. And I think that, that's just something that I think is worth clearing up before we dive into questions. That said, I have some questions. I've got a bunch of them here. I'm going to kind of jump around. And like I said, some of them I'm just going to have you answer, and some of them I'm going to, kind of dig on a little bit and see where we can get with it. But this first one I thought was interesting. This is from Aaron. He says, as a pro player, how do you approach spoiler season? What are the things that you'll have your eye on as we get Fate Reforged spoilers?
As a whole?
Well, yeah, like when the spoilers come out, you're a professional Magic player, right? So I think he wants to know your perspective is like, do you get excited? Are you like, oh, sweet new cards coming out? Or are you just looking for like, some type of, something that maybe you thought was missing in draft, and now you're like, oh, so they finally put in a wrath that costs less, or a better burn spell or whatever. Like, what's your approach when the spoilers come out?
It's funny because I spend so much time with, one of my close friends, David Williams, who is super like fanboy geek spoiler. Like,
oh, he sure is.
Midnight Eastern, he's on his phone. He's going to tell me what the spoiler is before I can remember what time it is. Like, that's just a common thing. So no matter how amped up I might get, it wouldn't feel that way because it pales so vastly in comparison. But I'm a little different on spoiler season. Yeah, I definitely love to see the new cards. I love to see the reprints. I love to see what direction the sets are being taken in. But a lot of that for me is because, a new set means a new Pro Tour, which means I'm already brewing decks. I don't take the spoiler and generally look at it from a limited perspective very often. I usually actually just kind of dive into drafts and start piecing things from what I actually see without really generally putting much thought into it from the spoilers themselves. Mostly I'm looking at, the rares, the powerful cards that, are going to shift the entire metagame of something like Standard, because, well, I mean, that's a lot of where my services are going to be needed, especially early on. Like, if you have a team like Channel Fireball, you want to have a lot of different deck ideas and be able to figure out your grasp on the Standard format. And because we're going to draft so much, and because there's so many great players and so many great ideas that are going to be spreading, and because none of us have actually played out the games where, you can get some kind of feel for what you think the limited format's going to be like, but you're not really going to know until you play it out, because, you take format to format, you got a card like, let's say, Mind Rot or Rakshasa's Secret, where in some formats it's insane, in some formats it's completely unplayable, and it's hard to figure out exactly where that's going to lie. Where you see all these different cards, and a lot of the things that get spoiled are generally not the commons, and the commons really are what are going to shape the format. Like, it's hard to see a spoiler and just go like, oh, Black White Warriors, that deck's going to be great. You're like, no,
Right.
you haven't seen the Mardu Horde Chiefs. Like, these cards are not the exciting, splashy ones that are getting spoiled immediately. And so, the things that are going to fill the major roles in Limited are generally the cards that get revealed last, because they aren't flashy generally.
Right.
Like,
You got to focus on those commons.
yeah, and those are the cards you see the most of. Those are the cards that are going to shape generally what the best color is. The deepest color in commons is generally going to be one of the stronger colors in the format. So it is hard to get a good grasp on for spoiler season. Once the entire set is released, try to get a little bit better idea. But mostly I'm looking at constructed decks at that point, and then I'll just start drafting. And like, it depends on the set. You see a card like Triplicate Spirits, and you didn't need a single draft. Like, okay, this card is better than basically any rare in the set.
Yeah.
I'm gonna take it. Like, all right, great. Like, real genius. Be able to solve that one. But once you see something like that, you start realizing, okay, a card like Raise the Alarm is going to be a lot better in this set than it was in other sets, because Convoke is so powerful. Like, Siege Worm is clearly good. Triplicate Spirits is the best card we've ever seen. And yeah, these are common. So let's figure out a way to make them better. And this deck's probably going to be solid.
Yeah, and I think that's reflected actually on this show as well, because what we do is, once the full spoiler's out, we do a set review where we go through every card. But what we don't do is try to pretend that we can predict what the actual metagame's going to look like. Our goal is to get the listeners set for their pre-releases and releases and drafts that happen after that, by not getting blindsided by cards, right? Where they just walk in and they're like, I'll play this card. And then they find out later, like, this card's just terrible. Like, what was I thinking, right? And these things that become clear after you've had your hands on the format for a while. So we try to get people the biggest head start there. But what we don't try to do is say, oh, well, we solved this format and it's clearly all about Black White Warriors, because everything's relative, right? So we have to wait until we actually can get our hands on the cards, just like you were saying, and kind of work our way through. Now, one thing that you mentioned there, which I kind of picked up on there, was Rakshasa's Secret, and that leads us somewhat into another question here. This is from Charles, MTG Dad. He says, what do you think of the outside the box deck drafted by the champion at GP Baltimore? Now, this was Gerard Fabiano. Did you have a chance to see his draft?
I did.
So I'm really curious what you think, because I was in the booth for this draft, and my jaw was just on the floor. Like, I just could not believe what I was seeing when he was drafting, and he was so just to give a quick snapshot for the listeners that didn't see this. Gerard Fabiano won the GP. He had a strategy. Now, we didn't know this, but we filmed him doing his draft. He had a strategy before he sat down that he loves. And his strategy is not playing red. He plays the other colors, which is fine. Like, I find myself drafting the no red deck somewhat consistently in this format too. It's a controlling, slow type deck. But his draft was absurd. He first picked Dig Through Time, which is fine. And then in the next pack, he second picked Rakshasa's Secret, and he couldn't wait. Like, I watch a lot of people draft either on camera or not, and he flips through the pack, he gets to the Rakshasa's Secret, he jumps out of his chair, brings it to the front, and does the thing where you kind of flippantly look through the rest of the cards to see what you might get back, but it's just an afterthought because you already know what you're taking. Like, he acted like he opened a bomb, and he took it. Second pick. And then his next 3 or 4 picks, like 3 of the 4 next picks were delve cards, like deep delve cards too. Like, he got a dead drop kind of late, it was like 3rd or 4th pick. And he also picked, maybe it was a treasure cruise or something, but it was like, we counted it, and he had the ability to delve for 23 after like 5 or 6 picks into the thing and then that one Rakshasa's Secret. So that's what Gerard did. Now, it worked out. He did end up winning the tournament as well, which, on this show, we talk about sample size and stuff like that a lot. So, I'm not convinced that really means a lot, but I will tell you that Gerard drafted that same deck in both of his other 2 drafts at the GP. He also 3-0'd both of the other 2 drafts. So he forced the same strategy for 3 drafts in a row at the GP level, and he 9-0'd. So, again, I'm not saying that means that this is great, but it is interesting. And I'm really curious to hear what you thought too. Cause like I said, when I was in the booth, Eric, my jaw was on the floor. I was like, what is he doing? Like, this is not normal.
Yeah. I mean, I'll preface by saying that I think that in any draft format, if you go in looking to force something, you are doing it wrong.
That's just bad. Yeah.
That's just not where you want to be. Usually when I hear people say this, oh yeah, I force such and such in whatever draft form. I'm like, okay, well, you're not very good at limited. Like, it's fine, right. No big deal. Like, that doesn't mean you're a bad person, or, or it doesn't even mean that you shouldn't be doing that. Like, some people are more than aware, like, hey, I know I'm not the best drafter in the world, but I know this deck really well, and I'm going to force it. And that's completely fine. We've seen people do that in something like Gate Crash Draft, where, like, I know I'm not the best drafter in the world. I'm going to draft Boros. Like, come what may. I mean, hopefully at that point, what the best Boros cards are. As I've seen some of the draft viewers where people went in forcing Boros and then took the 3rd best Boros card out of every pack.
Yes, well, I've seen that too.
That's an issue. That's a problem. But there's not anything quote unquote wrong with going in and forcing something, but it is not the best strategy. And if you are a great limited player and you want to show you're a great limited player, you got to be capable of doing whatever is available. Like, whatever gets past you, you want to stay open as much as you can. In the early packs, you hear people not wanting to commit to 3 colors. Well, if you're committed to 3 colors before you even open your first pack, then, you're basically disregarding everything these people are saying anyway. Like, what does it matter what the pick order is and whether you want to take the 1 color card versus the 3? If you're already, I'm playing these 3, I'm playing these 4 colors, like, all right, well, you've already made up your mind. It didn't even matter what you happen to open. But yeah, I mean, second pick, Rakshasa's Secret, is aggressive.
It's about the nicest way you could put it. I mean, I was trying to come up with ways to describe it when we were on the air. And on one hand, I was elated because it was exciting. It was like, what is he like? I've got a story now to talk about in the booth, as opposed to just, hemming and hawing over, some coin flippy type picks where it's like, well, he could take the 5 drop, but he probably needs the 2. Yeah, he took the 2. Okay. One of those things where it was like, holy crap, what is this guy doing? Like, that is very unorthodox, right? To take that pick there. I mean, he might just get it back. Like, oh yeah, I feel like I can get as many Rakshasa's Secrets as I want in a given draft, and I don't need to prioritize them. And he clearly had them. I mean, he even like pointed at it for the camera, he's like, this is what I want, and kind of led us along, which I thought was great for the cameras. But yeah, I was dumbfounded. I still am just like, what happened? Now, I asked him in his winter interview, and he said that, he had been practicing with a friend online, and they had kind of discovered this archetype, and that he thinks that Khans is heavily about card advantage. He feels that in Khans of Tarkir, you can basically break down the format into card advantage questions. Just like, well, am I up a card or am I down a card here? And so if Rakshasa's Secret is I'm up a card, then he'll take as many of them as he can get. Now, that hasn't been my experience, because I've played against the Warriors deck. Yeah. And they don't care if you Rakshasa's Secret them. In fact, they probably want you to, because that means you essentially took a turn off and they get to just pound you for 6 or 7 damage or whatever. But apparently, Gerard is able to, pick up the slack for those aggressive decks and draft enough defensive creatures to make the strategy work for him, because he was adamant. I mean, he really felt like that was the way to go.
Yeah, I can't even really fathom how big of a disadvantage he likely had against Ben S in the semifinals. And it looked like Ben's draws were borderline abysmal. And
they were abysmal.
He mulliganed and had that super clunky draw and was able to cast Take Up Arms into Raider Spoil and Debilitating Injury to draw 3 cards and deal 6 damage and draws 3 lands.
He just bricked, yeah.
And just like, all right, well, it's going to make the opposing deck, no matter what it is, look a lot better when you're able to beat something like that. But the truth of the matter is, Ben just drew like 11 lands. Like, it's just something that happens. And it felt like...
By the way, Ben's deck was absurd.
Matchup. Yeah, it was fantastic. And I can't imagine a much worse matchup for the all-delve 10-drop deck than the aggressive Warrior deck that, where your best card's going to be something like Dead Drop, and then he's just got Take Up Arms and Mardu Charm and ways to make tokens. Just like, all right, well, Yeah, it's just Rakshas's Secret just doesn't do that much. Like,
yeah, that was the funny part for me in the booth too, because behind the scenes, like I'm looking, and I said this on the air. I said this is a bad matchup for Gerard. Like, not only is Ben not going to make any mistakes, his deck is very assertive. It's the type of deck that I like to draft, and I don't mean power level, but I mean I like my cards to do things, right? I want to affect the board every turn if I can, right? I really try not to play cards like Rakshas's Secret very often because of the fact that when you're under heat, it doesn't do anything. It's like you're at such a tempo loss by casting a spell and tapping your mana. And so in my mind, though, I'm kind of thinking like, this is going to be justice, right? Like you can't do what Gerard's doing and get away with it. It's too polar, right? It's like you've pushed too far in one direction. And then when I looked at it, I thought, well, Ben's deck is exactly the deck to punish what Gerard's doing, where he's going to have, because Gerard's obviously going to have good matchups against certain things with his strategy, but Ben's deck is not the matchup that you want to face when you're dirtling and just doing nothing turn after turn. You're treasure cruising and Rakshas's Secreting, and like you said, you're setting up like mediocre dead drops as like your big finish or whatever. And so I thought, well, this is going to be a thumping, right? And then, like you said, Ben just kind of ran bad, and Gerard ran him over, and then Gerard, was able to grind out a decent Abzan deck in the finals as well. And like those are the matchups I could see Gerard's deck having an edge in, but not the kind of
Secret's actually pretty good against the dirtily Abzan deck, no matter how strong it is. I mean, you can be full of cards like Dune Blast that are fantastic, but Rakshas's Secret's actually good against that stuff. It's very hard to get to 7 mana and still have these cards in your hand.
Yeah.
But you take a deck like Ben's, it's just going to take basically a decent draw, and I feel like it's going to be very hard, if impossible, for Gerard to win, just because he can get out these creatures. And if you're getting 2-for-1s with things like Rakshas's Secret, that's great. But, you still have to deal with a bunch of tokens. Like, these are quote-unquote card advantages because there aren't actually great ways to deal with these threats. Now, you can play bigger creatures to more or less brick wall them. But, I mean, Ben's deck, like we said, Take Up Arms, Mardu Charm, multiple pony backs, like, these all create a bunch of tokens. And Gerard can't really push through. Like, his dead drop kind of looks meaningless. Like, cards like Empty the Pits, I don't even think he ended up main decking. And
no, he did bring it in, but he didn't main it.
Sure. But like Ben kind of has all this time to find something like Sorin that Gerard's deck can't deal with, or even Rush of Battle to just force all these things through, or High Sentinels. Like, obviously 2 of these cards are ridiculous rare / mythics, but how are you going to beat this? Like, you play High Sentinels with a bunch of mana and all these dorks, and they're all just going to get huge. Like, what are all your Archer's Parapets or Highland games really going to do against this?
Yeah, and even just against 1/1s, like against 3 or 4 1/1s, those 2 cards that you just named, which were his main lines of defense in the early game, just don't match up. So I thought that was interesting. It certainly made for an exciting broadcast, though, from the commentator seat. I will say that. And of course, congrats to Gerard. That's his second limited GP win in the past year. Like he's definitely on a heater there.
Gerard is one of the winningest players of all times. Also, I think the losingest player of all time.
Yeah.
He does have the record for most losses in sanctioned Magic in history, but he's played so much Magic. He's so experienced. Obviously, played so many Pro Tours, like all these so's, but he's played so much Magic so much professional Magic for so long.
Yeah. This next question is, we received a lot of these questions about tilting and about, mental game because of the correlation between poker and Magic, right?
I don't know anything about that, though.
And I wanted to just take one of them because I think it's kind of interesting because I thought about it for myself and I was curious how you viewed it, which is Slick Jagger. He says they had a debate on tilting on his, he says he calls it his 3rd tier podcast. It's called Money Draft. And he says, for you, is the tilt worse from poker or Magic?
Again, I'm not. What is tilt? What is this?
You're just completely unfamiliar with the concept.
No, I've never heard of it. It sounds wonderful, though. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, they're so different. Like, it's weird because if you see me in person, you interact with me. Not long after taking a beat for, whether it's top 8 of a PTQ or to win $1 million, whatever it may be, it's hard for it to sit there for too long. Like in the moment, in the first 10, 15, maybe even 30 minutes, oh yeah, like any wall I come across, I'm going to want to put a hole into, like just leave me alone. Nobody talk to me, whatever. But then I've been doing this for 20 years. I've been playing Magic for 20 years. I've been playing poker for 10, like 10 professionally. I mean, I played online before that. It's like, yeah, I've seen it all. I've taken every beat imaginable. Like, yeah, of course I'm still mad every time. Like I equate it. I've told this before, when you lose these giant pots in poker, especially just when someone just plays terribly and you really feel like they don't deserve it and you did everything right and put yourself in a position you're 90% to win, 95% to win, whatever it is, and you lose. The feeling is similar to that of being robbed at gunpoint. You're like, this is mine.
Yes.
Like I earned this. I went to work every day. I earned this money, and someone just took it from me, and they didn't deserve it. And it is a helpless and sickening and horrible feeling. And I think that's the best analogy I've come up with so far. Like that's just how I feel.
That's a beautiful. That is exactly how it feels. Especially because in poker, there's this extra element where you have to watch that person stack up your money. Right? You have to sit there and then, they'll always make the little comments or, start talking to their buddies or whatever. And it's just like, you're sitting there, you got to just suck it up and take it. And that stings.
Yeah, it's a gross feeling. And, the majority of my live poker does come from tournaments. So at least I do just get to leave and go drive home by myself and, think about what could have been if I was a little less unlucky. And you know what? It sucks and it feels bad. And for the longest time, my way to deal with that, especially when I was still in a tournament, let's say like a World Series of Poker event where you take so many beats because you're playing against a lot of people who are just really not good, especially like 7-8 years ago where things were just booming and there were so many people who just didn't know what they were doing that you could get so much free money along the way in these tournaments where you take these huge, terrible beats and you would still have plenty of chips to work with. It would take 3 or 4 to really knock you out. But I'm just sitting there and my way of stress release, my way of, dealing with the anger was to spout off on social media. And that was why I got Twitter. That was the original reason I got Twitter is I'm going to use this to spout off like every time I'm mad. And I had no other use for it. And, it wasn't a big program. It wasn't, something that is as common as it is today. And honestly, there was a large part of me that for the longest time, I am very much a person who is introverted, who, likes my own space, who is not great in a huge crowd in general. And this was my way of kind of being like, hey, I kind of just want to be alone. I don't really want a bunch of people trying to get to know me while, fame or whatever you want to call it, popularity started to grow while, I was putting up results in various games and my name was becoming more well known. I kind of would more subconsciously than not make an ass of myself to, I think I was just trying to deflect people from trying to, say anything.
To kind of create some space.
I wanted to make myself more or less unapproachable. Like that was kind of a lot of it. And, I had a lot of bad interactions with people in the poker world, of course. And, I had my close friends who knew me, who that was all I ever needed. And, I felt like that was good. That was what I wanted. And obviously, as I've gotten older and now that I'm in my 30s, I don't really feel that way anymore. You kind of let more people in, show a little bit more of yourself, especially in the Magic community, which I've tried to do over the past year, 2 years, somewhere in that range. Not sure the exact time point, but kind of give people a chance to get to know you a little bit better. And I've been pleasantly surprised consistently by how great the community has been. So it is made it a lot easier to not tilt off at things like Magic. Of course, losing matches that you have no business losing it sucks, but whatever. What are you going to do? That you're playing a game of variance? Like, of course I'm going to be upset in the moment it happens and maybe for 5-10 minutes afterwards, because I'm human and I do care. I'm not going to pretend I don't care. I don't even understand how some people do this where they lose a huge match and it's nothing. They're just over it immediately. I'm like, okay, well, that's so weird. I care so much. Like, I'm not like mad. I'm not looking to hit anyone, but you know, I feel it. Like, it stings. So that's hard for me to process. I don't think I'll ever be that way. I don't think I want to be that way. I like the fact that I have emotions that, you know, sometimes it's going to come off bad, and I'm not the best at expressing myself always. But yeah, I definitely think the tilt in poker is going to be greater, just because I just don't. In a lot of ways, I don't care as much. And in Magic, when you lose to people who quote unquote don't deserve it, like I would say in poker, when they don't deserve it, it really stings a lot. In Magic, I kind of just want them to feel good that they were able to beat me. Like, that's good. We want more people in this community. Like, unless they were a horrible person during the match or did a bunch of shady or shitty things, whatever you want to say, like just a lot of negatives in the match, then whatever, then I don't really care. But most people are just so welcoming, so happy to be there, so happy to beat you, and that's great. They deserve to have that feeling, and that was something I didn't realize for a long time. And people, I think Patrick Sullivan was the first person to really state this for me, to make me understand. It's like, I mean, think about how great they feel to have pulled out the win. Who cares that, you know, you got mana screwed and they quote unquote may not have deserved it? Like, who's to say who deserves anything? Like, they beat you and they're happy about it, and why are you taking anything away from them? And you're like, yeah, you are completely right. That is true. So yeah, it's made it a lot easier to not get upset. And my results over the last like 9 months are borderline unrealistic, how well I've been running. And
yes, you are insane.
So, I mean, yeah, ever since that, it's just been kind of crazy.
Well, that's awesome, man. I think that's a great transition to make. And I mean, I've obviously, you know, kind of worked my way through and into the Magic community as well, and just been like pleasantly surprised and happy at every step as well. And, you know, I have also a different perspective having done this podcast, because it's amazing how many people relate to the way that like you and I think about games, right? About this approach of like, I want to improve because winning's fun, and I want to get better at this, right? Like, this is something I take seriously, and I'm willing to say I take this seriously, you know, even as like a full grown adult, right? Where I can just say, look, this is important to me. I'm not beating around the bush. I want to be good at this, you know? And so now what? And I think that you find that like people really relate to that. And, you know, when I'm out at a GP, I'll meet a listener and they'll just say something like, you know, oh, your show's really helped me. I'm really appreciative of that. And it's just like those type of interactions just carry a lot of weight with me, because they feel a lot more genuine than something along the lines of like, hey, I like your show, right? It's like, oh, cool. Like, I'm glad you enjoy it. That's great, right? But this is somebody coming up to specifically say, you know, I really feel like what you did helped me achieve something that I wanted to achieve. And that's a lot better than like, I entertained you for an hour, you know. That's
good.
It's a big game. Yeah. So next question. All right, so this is from Nerd to the Core. He says, Efro's had a lot of success over the years. How does Limited today compared to older formats? What are the biggest differences in the environments from the perspective of a professional / high level player like you?
Wow.
What was old school Limited like?
It was not similar. It really wasn't. Like, I've had this conversation of, you know, I lived for a long time with Huey Jensen, and, you know, we're talking about just like invasion draft, where you could keep a hand with, you know, 2 lands, couple terminates, Kavu Climber, and not hit your 3rd land for 5 turns, and you're still going to play a game of Magic. Well, that's not the case anymore. Like, you know, if you're going to miss a bunch of land drops, get horribly mana screwed, you're going to lose. Like, the tempo, the power of the cards is dramatically different than it used to be. You know, a card like Fairy Squadron was a great first pick. It's a 3/3 flyer vanilla for 5, more or less. I mean, that's what the card is. 3/3.
That's a first pick?
Absolutely.
Oh, man.
And just Kavu Climber is just a great card. It's a 3/3 for 5 when it comes into play, draw a card. Nothing else. Like, that's all it does. And that is a reasonable first pickable card, and very good in the format. And it's just so dramatically different in so many ways. Like, I mean, when they just play Butcher the Horde and you just die in, you know, your 2 turns, like, all right, well, that's just kind of how it is. And it's the same thing. It's not just Limited. It's the same thing in Constructed, where you used to see decks like Draw Go, and, you know, formats where you could choose to draw first, and in Constructed. And yeah, things like Planeswalkers just completely changed the scope of Magic and forced the power level and the power creep of the rares and the creatures to continue to get up. The spells used to be far more powerful than the creatures. It's complete opposite today, with the creatures and Planeswalkers just completely dominating, which forces tempo to be generally the most important thing. You cannot fall really far behind because there's no way to come back. So, you need to draft and build your deck with those things in mind. And that is a function of the popularity of Magic. I mean, the reason why games like Magic and poker can hit boons is because players who are not as familiar, who are not as strong, who are not as experienced as professionals or others can still win. There has to be a large scale of variance, or you cannot get people to keep wanting to play this game and to keep coming back despite not being the best. I mean, there's a reason why these games are so popular and chess is not. I mean, it doesn't mean chess isn't a great game, it just doesn't have variance. And variance is huge for these games to basically excel. And as Magic has become more popular, they have added more variance to it. I mean, that is something that really helps drive sales. I mean, it's very smart on their behalf. And, people have asked me pretty consistently, well, would you like them to get rid of a lot of the variance in Magic? Of course. I think I'm very good at Magic. The less variance there is, the better it is for me. Do I actually want that to happen? Would I ever do anything to try to make that happen? No, of course not, because the success of Magic and the widespread growth is also very good for me, and even better than, my results being better than they currently are. There's a reason why the best players of all time are not even hitting that 70% win rate. 70% is not that often. I mean, to win something 70% if you're the best in the world is great, but it's not like that's crazy high.
No, it's not.
That just goes to show how big a factor something like variance is. And yeah, it's continued to climb, and I believe it will either continue to climb or stay at this level. I don't think they will be making any moves to be reducing variance anytime soon. I think it pushes a lot of players away where they want these dramatic effects, these huge planeswalkers and mythic rares that are, borderline unbeatable in a lot of ways. You're looking at a card like Siege Rhino. It's just rare. It's 4 mana, 4/5 trample that drains for 3. Like, that's ridiculous.
This is ridiculous.
Yeah, like that card would just be unbeatable like 10 years ago, 12 years ago, whenever, Invasion was around. I guess that was even earlier than that. I guess it's 15 now, but that's just, that's the nature of the game. I mean, that is the business decision that, Wizards of the Coast has made. And I don't think anyone intelligent would be arguing against the success they've shown. They know exactly what they're doing, and I applaud them for that. And, it's going to make it harder for, myself and Ben Stark and Luis Scott Vargas and whoever else you might know to win, and that's okay.
I do find that fascinating, though, to hear that from your perspective. You just mentioned Luis, and I couldn't help myself.
We're laughing at nothing.
There's a couple of daggers on him, and I have to do it. So Immerk wants to know... He doesn't actually have a question. He says, maybe you can both just make fun of how other pros mispronounce card names like Voltaic Key.
Yeah, that one's so weird. I thought he was trolling for so long and it was just a joke, but no, he really did think that was how you said the card name.
Yeah. So, he's really funny. I was in the booth with him once, and this was this year, and we were commentating Standard, and somebody had a Sylvan Caryatid. And when that card came out, I didn't know how to pronounce Caryatid or Caryatid. So I looked it up. I looked it up online because I got to be in the booth and I want to make sure I'm saying things right. And I did the little thing where you can play the sound, and it said Caryatid. And I'm like, okay, well, that must be how you say it. So when I started commentating, that's how I said it. Now, some people say Caryatid, and I don't think that's actually like, I don't know if that's like strictly wrong or not, but that's not the info I got. And we were in between rounds, and Luis goes, why do you say it like that? And I was like, well, I looked it up. And he's like, yeah, but like most people say it the other way. And I'm like, yeah, but I mean, this is right. Like, I don't, he's like, well, don't you want to say it how most people just have decided to say it? Which I think has some merit, but I'm like, well, no, I'd rather just say it right, I guess. Like, like
that's kind of a weird one, huh? Because I say it the other way.
What do you say?
Caryatid.
Yeah. And I don't think that's actually wrong. Like, I just got it from the whatever dictionary.com or whatever, right? And so I'm just like, whatever. I'm just going to keep saying it how I got it off the thing. Like, I don't think what I'm saying is wrong. And then that was it. I didn't really think about it much. But then I was watching, I think it was you and him commentating in the VSL.
Yeah.
And you were giving him all types of crap for saying, I'm like, wait a minute. He won't budge off of this. And he's saying it wrong.
Well, no one says that. That's just a real word that's just like used in like common language, more or less. I mean, of course it's not like people aren't talking about voltaic all the time, but it is a word that people know as just being a word where, you have to look up something like caryatid or caryatid. I mean, it's not like a common expression. Like voltaic is just a word that
it is
used, and no one has ever said it the other way except for him. Like, if you just read it phonetically,
it's spelled phonetically.
And I assume he just misread it at an early age and just now can't get off it. I mean, then you have Ben S., who of course mispronounces most card names, but I mean, English is not his native language, so
he speaks Floridian first.
Yep, exactly. You still, but yeah, I mean, that's just I don't really know. There are other people who the weird ones that get me are when like I don't even know that they're necessarily wrong to say it. Like, but I know everyone says Emrakul. That's just how it's pronounced. And then when some people are on camera and just always calling it Emrakul, it's just like what? Like it just it like drives a like knife into my brain. It just because it's just so obscure. Or people say like Mana or Garuk, and I'm just like,
Garuk drives me crazy.
Yeah, it's just not. Maybe it's right. Maybe it is. Like honestly, I couldn't.
I asked, and it's not. It's Garrick. I've asked the guys at Wizards. Like,
I assume that with someone who does as much coverage as like myself or you or all the other people who just do commentary constantly, that if it was something different and it is like a major character like Emrakul or Garrick, that they'll probably say something at some point, and I'll start hearing other people say it here and there. Like, even if it's just sporadic, I'm going to hear it. Mm-hmm. So that will cause me to question a bit more. But no, it's just like no one says it like that.
Yeah. Ben's the best with that because he's trying to get better, and he really has made it. But like throughout all of Worlds, I would walk by him and say, Teamer. Because he kept saying Timur or Timur. He got really hung up on the U in there.
In the finals of San Antonio, when he says like Aquarius and all these like weird pronunciation, Aquarius, and just like every single time Luis would just look at me and make this weird face, just because like you don't want to interrupt him. He's in the middle of like an actual good thought. Yeah, so I'm not gonna like correct him, and also no one really cares. Like it's kind of funny. Ben has been able to establish himself as, because his commentary is so good and his insight is so accurate and like well said, other than the fact that he doesn't speak great English. Right. Like no one says anything, and they kind of just like it, as he's kind of just that lovable. I don't want to call Ben a doofus, but you know what I'm saying. Like,
no, I do. It goes to like the Chipotle thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Where he's going to eat on camera and people just laugh. Yeah, they just thought it was funny. Where some people, if they did that, they would be like, "Oh, that's really unprofessional."
Yeah, like, how does this guy have a job? You're like, "Oh, that's just classic Ben."
It's just Ben S's. Yeah, that's just how it goes. That's really funny. I got one more Sidewinder question before we get back to actual ones. Nathaniel Walker wants to know, how long will you stay with the pork bun oath if the other two members continue to put up pedestrian individual tournament results? He says, you can't carry the team forever.
Okay, let's see where to start with that one. Luis Scott Vargas is, I think Luis honestly is I don't want to just say this broad statement that might someone prove me wrong at some point, but I think there's a reasonable chance Luis is the best technical player of all times.
Okay.
I believe that if someone had taught him how to draft a decade ago, that he would have 8 or 9 or so top 8s. Even if you discount like how lucky he got that he's made top 8s at like X and 4 records that no one else really gets to make. Mm-hmm. He's run very well, quote unquote, in getting his 5 top 8s, but he could have so much more. And a lot of that, his win percentage in Constructed was 80-something% for so long. And there's a reason why. I mean, he's just a fantastic Magic player and was so bad at draft. And he's gotten a lot better. I'll give him credit for that. But I can't even imagine if someone had taught him to draft like a decade ago. And Luis has played 0 individual Grand Prix this year, so I'm not sure how pedestrian his results have been. I mean, we've played 2 team GPs. We got top 4 and top 8, which are pretty good results.
Not too bad. Yeah.
And Paul's just like getting back into Magic. He streams all the time. He plays more than we do. And, he's only played 1 additional GP that Luis hasn't played, when he played San Antonio and we were doing coverage. So, Obviously, the results aren't insane, but we're also talking about a small sample size. And I do think Luis has had a tough run of it the past year plus. And, that's part of getting older and having a life and having a job. And, he still plays a ton of Magic. I don't know if people realize how much it actually is. I mean, he's on Magic Online all the time, but I think it also has to do a little bit with the amount of time you spend thinking about Magic. I'm not sure how much of it has to do with just playing Magic, because if you take someone like Paulo Vitor Damarosa, who has some of the best results of all time, he's never played much Magic. Like, he was never someone who played Magic Online. He lived in Brazil, where it wasn't an option to play very often. So it's not something he did that much of. And we were talking about some of his results not being so great recently, and he was like, nothing's changed. It's not, obviously I play Hearthstone now, but I never really played Magic anyways. But I think it's just spending so much less time thinking about Magic, having Magic be the focus of your thoughts. Like, I would spend time when I was in college just thinking about decks all the time. Like, all my notebooks were filled with deck lists. I know a lot of other players are the exact same, like the Brian Kiblers and the Jerry Thompsons. Like, that's just a common thing, where when you're kind of eat, sleep, drink Magic, like, you're gonna have better results even if you're not playing as much. Maybe I'm not sure if that even makes sense, or if that's just my theory that is completely false, but that's how I've felt it's always been. And I've spent, I don't play that much Magic myself. I don't use Magic Online very often. I only downloaded it to play Vintage Super League, and I've done a few streams here and there. I don't play live too often. I play a couple events here and there, and obviously I play the Grand Prix and Pro Tours, but I definitely don't play as much Magic as a lot of other people. But I am thinking about Magic all the time. I'm talking about Magic all the time. I'm watching streams all the time, reading all these articles and watching these videos, and Magic is just, the biggest part of my life. And I think that's a lot of the reason why, I'm just able to think about Magic better during the actual events, even if I'm not playing as much. I think because I've seen so much and I've gotten so much information from so many sources about it, that it's been able to elevate my game in some respect.
Yeah.
I that might be false, but that's just what I think is.
No, but I mean, I think that also there's the one big X factor too, right, is that your vast experience with the game, right? Like, the fact that you've played for a long time and that you've kind of seen it all, and you've gone through these learning experiences and had these level up moments, they allow you to take that information that you're getting from your friends, from the internet, from videos, from articles, from thinking about it, from writing stuff down, and actually assimilate it into a way that you can actually apply, right? I think that one of the things you see a lot, in both poker and Magic, to be honest, are people will often misapply concepts, and that can be worse than if they just never heard the concept in the first place. And I think that, like, somebody like you is just not going to make that mistake. You're going to be able to apply the information properly. You're going to be able to weight it, to prioritize it, to weigh where it's coming from, and put, less or more significance on it because of that. And that's a skill, right? That's a skill that you earned after having played the game for a really long time and gone through all the downswings and all the, pitfalls and all those type of things that everybody falls for, and then come out on the other side after having, gained that experience. So I think that counts for a lot too.
Everything you're saying is completely true. I was trying to equate it more to someone like Luis or Paul or Paulo, who have also, tons of experience, but
less input, right? I mean, I assume that if Luis is, putting in his 40 plus hour work week or whatever, and, taking care of his business stuff and all of that, and his personal life and everything, that he's probably not reading quite as many articles or talking to people, or, you know what I mean? It probably has to take a hit somewhere, just in time. So, before I let you go, I have one more big question for you, and I kind of wanted to throw this one at you and just let you go where you want to go with it. I don't really have any specific expectation on it. But I think it does. I think it will give you a chance to kind of give an idea of how you approach the game from a bigger picture perspective. This is from Asparagus. He says, if you could tell the average player one thing to work on in Limited that would gain the most win rate percentage points, what would it be?
Yeah, that's that's a tough one to hone in on, just because.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to ask you, because I have a feeling that the answer doesn't. It's so rarely just, well, this, right? Like, oh, well, you should play 18 lands more than you think you should. It's not that simple, right? Like, that's kind of why I wanted to throw it at you.
Right. There is no one answer. People always ask, what's the most important one? It's like, well, why do you care what the most important thing is if all of these things are so important? Like, how can we judge what, if some great player is at 100% level and this thing is 9% and all the other ones are 8% to, really combine together to make you a great player? What does it matter which one was 9 when you need all the other ones? It's not going to change much. And so it kind of is the same thing as with anything else. You want to become a great limited player. You want to become a great Magic player. You want to become a great chef. You want to become a great basketball player. What do you got to do? Well, you got to get experience. Like,
right.
you got to draft. You got to play constructed. You got to cook. You got to go get on the court. Like, this is what you got to do. Like, it's very hard to become great at anything without putting in experience. Well, what's the next step once you have that experience? So you got to play with people better than you. Like, there is only so much that you can improve on your own. It's just very hard to do so. And if you play with people who are worse than you, well, it's very hard to you can learn something from everyone, but there's a limit to how much you can learn from people who don't know as much. Like, you're trying to expand the way that you think. You're expanding your horizons. You're trying to open yourself up to new ideas. Well, you got to get new ideas. You got to talk to people who have been there, done that. You got to watch them. You got to see what they do. And it doesn't mean that everything they do is right. I mean, if you're on a scale from 1 to 100, you're a 60 at draft and you're watching someone who's a 70, well, there's a lot of room for them to improve. And there's a lot of things they're going to do that are going to be wrong. And you might realize some of those things are wrong, but you can also learn from the things they are doing. And that is the biggest part to being better at anything, I think, is learning from people better than you. Because, I mean, it's just the fastest way to kind of soak in knowledge. Like, I think that the biggest contributor for me when I came back to Magic, I only came back less than 5 years ago to professional Magic after taking a long break, and I got to team with Team Channel Fireball. And what I did for the longest time was I didn't play as many games. Like, I've never been one to play a lot of Magic. It's tiring for me. It's exhausting mentally, and I feel like I learned so much by watching other things and trying to apply it and figure out why people did things. So I would spend hour after hour, day after day, just watching Luis play against Paulo. And they would do things that I didn't understand, and I would figure out how their brains worked. Like, they were thinking so outside the box because at the time, which obviously, there's been some tail off. They don't play as much now as they did, 4 years ago, which, that's a function of life. That is what happens. But I feel like they were at the absolute top of the game. And what separates the great from the greatest is being able to beat the other greats. And that's what would happen when they played against each other. Like, their technical play was close to flawless, which great. Any of us can play close to flawless if you learn enough about Magic, like, to just know what the correct play is, curve out. You're going to make mistakes here and there. You're going to have brain slips here and there. Everyone does it. No big deal. Not something that's very relevant. If you want to be great at Magic, you can make mistakes. Not a huge difference. But to try to outmaneuver someone else who's at that extremely high level, well, that's what makes you great. And seeing what they did to try to get the advantage in their games when playing against each other as, likely the two best players in the world, well, that's what I think really opened my eyes into, just competitive Magic and being able to figure that out. And it's the same thing with draft, just being able to watch, like, there's so much content where you can come onto this podcast and listen to what Marshall and guests tell you. You can go and watch a video of Ben S. draft at the last GP, or maybe one on Channel Fireball, or see what these people do. And they discuss why they're doing the things they're doing. You can watch Huey draft, in a number of different ways, be it a Grand Prix or a draft video, and he'll explain his thinking. And those are the things where you have to take in. It doesn't mean he's not going to make mistakes. I mean, if you look at the World's drafts, I feel like Yuya's first Vintage Masters draft, that he just didn't draft that well.
Right.
I feel like he probably wasn't super experienced with the format, which is something that happens commonly, and he got punished. His deck just wasn't very good. And Yuya is, if not the best player in the world, certainly close, and he's great at limited. So, it's just something that happens. And you saw the same things with, like, the Cons drafts and Huey's draft recaps at Worlds, where he said multiple mistakes he made. Like, these are things that happen, but, you learn from them, and you learn from these players, and you learn from your friends who are better than you. Those are the biggest things to improve upon. Then from there, you just have to, you have to know the things that are most important. You need to understand how a curve works. You need to know distributions of spells, lands. You need to understand the formats, they change dramatically, whether something is tempo-based, control-based. The N15 format versus Cons format versus, a Blood Rush format are just vastly different. You need to be familiar with everything that your opponents can do, which is just, it comes from experience. It's very hard to just sit down and memorize all the morphs and all the relevant tricks. And then from there, it keeps going. You can always learn more. You can always understand, why is my opponent doing this? Why are they making this attack? What might they have? What are they representing? These are where your mind needs to get if you're going to be at the highest level, or you're going to be at a high level even. Just your brain just needs to be thinking about these things, and you need to be doing it fast. There's a time limit. These are things that you need to not be even consciously thinking about if you want to succeed at high levels. You need to be processing what your play is going to be, what your opponent's doing, and why in basically split seconds. And so, that just comes from experience. That's really the name of the game. The more you draft, the more you will recognize situations, the more you'll be like, oh, he has kill shot here. Oh, he's showing feat of resistance here. Oh, dragon skill boom. That makes sense.
Right.
Oh, Pine Walker. All these things are relevant, and you just got to be aware of them. And that all comes from experience. And then watching the actual draft portion itself, that comes from, being able to understand card evaluations, understand a basic pick order, understand the willingness to stay flexible and open to go in different directions. I feel like I'm one of the best in the world because I've had this happen a number of times at the Pro Tour, of mitigating basically, disaster drafts where I've had a lot of things go wrong, get cut in multiple directions. And you know what? You still need a deck. You can't go 0-3 in limited, or your Pro Tour is basically done. So
right.
You got to figure out a way to, how am I going to get one win here and maybe one win there, get my 2-1 to leave myself in contention. These are all important skills that, there's no one thing.
Yeah. And I think that is sort of the headliner, right? Is that I think if people are looking for, the one crazy trick or whatever, that you see online, you're just looking in the wrong direction. And I mean, we talk about it on this show too. I don't have any illusions about if you just listen to the show, it'll solve all your problems. We're trying to systematically hammer through all of these things, a lot of the ones that you just said today, and try to work through as many as we can on here too. And, I have to say, Eric, it's been awesome having you on. You fit the mold of the show really well, and of our mentality, and it shows. It was really cool to get to pick your brain today. I do want to give you a chance though to tell people, well, where can they find you? Can they see, where can they get a hold of you or see your stuff, or where can they get you?
Well, I'm an underground dojo keyboard fighter thing, so it's very hard. But
they don't publish the list for that.
The first rule of underground dojo keyboard fight. But I mean,
that's the clunkiest secret club name ever.
Well, we're trying to shorten it, but right now it's been hard, making the T-shirts. I'm pretty much Efro Poker on everything. I kind of wouldn't mind changing that at some point. I wish that I could get the Twitter handle just Efro or something along those lines. We'll see if that ever ends up changing. But I'm pretty much Efro Poker across any form of social media that exists that I would ever want to be a part of. So
and where can people, I know that you've got the VSL coming up. You had a really strong finish at that. I'm assuming you're going to be participating in that again as well. That's the Vintage Super League, by the way, for people that haven't checked it out yet.
Yeah, the Vintage Super League, getting asked to be a part of that and hearing the people who are going to be associated. Of course, the original list of people when it was only a few people signed on was oh yeah, we have Bob Maher, Luis Scott Vargas, Josh Utterley, and you're just oh I'll be a part of that, sure.
Yeah, you don't need to tell me much more.
It's I get to play Vintage with a bunch of the best players of all times and a lot of my closest friends. They're I could be persuaded.
Yeah, and I'm just a huge fanboy of that show. I watch it religiously. I was so glad when I talked to Randy about it when he was first starting it, and I was I think this sounds really sweet, and I started watching it, and it was just is it Tuesday yet? I don't watch TV shows. I only watch them on Netflix when somebody recommends some specific thing, but I do not miss VSL. I come home and I usually end up watching the rebroadcast, and I'm a big fan. And you so you are going to be a part of it though for the next season. You're going to be doing commentary and playing in it.
Yeah, I mean, definitely
Awesome.
appreciate Randy Bueller inviting me and giving me a chance to do. I did quite a bit of commentary in the first season,
Yeah, you
which
did great. I really enjoyed it.
yeah, it was really fun. And yeah, I mean, just being able to talk about vintage with other great players, with great players playing it, it was kind of perfect, and it gave me a great opportunity to try to learn a little bit more about what you do, and try to learn a few things and get some advice from a few of the greats out there, which is pretty fantastic because I love Magic commentary. I love Magic content. I'm a junkie for the stuff. I mean, I watch the replays of every tournament I play in and every tournament I don't play, and I'm watching live. I mean, after the Vintage Super League, I watch the whole thing live, and then I watch the replay. Like,
Yeah, so you and I are the same like that.
it's just more Magic. I want to see if I'm missing anything. It goes back to the question you just asked, like, how do you become better at anything? I want to learn. Like, I'm not the best vintage player in the world. I'm not the best commentator in the world. I want to see where I'm slipping up that I can notice, or where someone makes a play that I didn't see, or the mistakes that I made. I love rewatching my matches to hear like what the commentators have to say, or just what I miss, because I make mistakes. I mean, everyone does, but and sometimes it's unfortunate. You're watching and just like, wow, why did I do that? What is wrong with me? And it's just like, all right,
I know that feeling, buddy.
Yeah. I from watching, all the coverage of all the Pro Tours, I've noticed just how much fatigue has cost me kind of late in the day. I've watched some of my like round 15 and 16 feature matches, just like, I am just not playing very tight. And the way my brain is working, it's just not at the level it needs to be late in these tournaments. And so, I've tried to, work on some various things to just improve, my mental and physical health to, be better about those type of things. And yeah, I just got to watch more Magic and learn as much as I can and do the right things and for my life and my Magic life. And yeah, hopefully clean up the mistakes.
Yeah, of course. That's always the goal. Well, Eric, thanks a lot for taking the time to come on LR. I certainly hope this isn't the last time you come on. I really enjoyed you as a guest here, and I'm sure I have a good pulse on the listeners, and I think they're going to absolutely love you too. So hopefully you'll come back again soon.
Yeah, for sure. I appreciate it.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. For you guys, if you want to, you heard Eric's on Twitter at eFroPoker. I'm Marshall_LR. You can also send any feedback via email to lr@lrcast.com. If you want to join the Limited Resources clan on Magic Online, it's really easy. You can just send me a message when I'm on there. And the only rules, of course, are that you got to love Magic and you can't be a jerk. If you meet the relatively easy criteria, you can be in the clan as well. This is a little bit of an announcement, but not a real one. I'm working on getting a permanent co-host in, and I'm hoping to have an announcement for that in the next few weeks. I thank everybody for hanging out with me as I've gone through a bunch of really remarkable guest co-hosts, but I definitely want to get back to the point where I have a regular, co-host again. I enjoy that interaction, and I'm working, trying to nail something down. So I'll keep you guys as updated as I can as I work towards new goals and stuff for the show. But again, thanks as always for hanging out, and we'll talk to you next week.